Okay. Jen, thanks so much for joining us. You are an amazing person. I absolutely just adore you, as you know, and because I can't say enough nice things about you whenever I talk about you. Let me introduce Jen a little bit to you and why I love her so much. I'm going to read her bio and then I'm going to tell you the real reasons why I love her. So her bio is pretty impressive. No one get jealous here about all that she has accomplished in her life, but she is the CEO of Moving Forward Solutions. She helps tech leaders become the leader that everyone wants to work for. And side note, I have been to one of her masterminds and holy cow, she knows her stuff. She's so smart. She is a wife, a mom, bonus mom, a woman of faith, and a colon cancer survivor. On the corporate side of Jen is where she consults with national and international companies, spoken at many conferences, and has published in Forbes and is quoted in several trade magazines. This I did not know. We'll have to talk about that later. That's so amazing. What an accomplishment to be quoted in not just trade magazines, but in Forbes. She is the host of Today's Top Leaders, a resource for tech sector leaders. Is this your podcast, Jen?
No,
what is that?
It's LinkedIn Lives.
Oh, LinkedIn Live. Okay, clueless over here. Wow, holy cow. And on the spiritual side of Jen is when she listens to God's voice and helps create products and services that help others intentionally connect with God. For example, she is the creator of the 3 a.m. with God journal, which is something I absolutely love. In fact, I don't know why I didn't think about grabbing mine, but it's sitting upstairs in my nightstand. There we go. Thank you. I love the 3 a.m. with God journal. We'll probably talk about it at the end. I know she wasn't planning on doing that, so I'm kind of throwing an audible. Thanks for running with it. But I love it because the whole purpose of it is to help you learn how you personally hear from God, right? And to be able to write down what inspiration you're receiving and then take action on it. And I really like that part about how it asks you what you did on it and what was the outcome of that. That's been something that's really cool. And as I've been doing more of that accountability side, I can tell my ability to receive and understand revelation has definitely been amplified. Did I explain that good?
Great.
Okay. All right. So for more information, you can get in touch with Jen. And you can find her at movingforwardsolutions.com. I'll post all her links and everything down below in the show notes and everything. Okay, now I want to tell you why I love Jen. It's not just because she's impressive from the corporate side and her career, and she's a career coach. I've heard her personally speak many times, and I've been in her mastermind, but it's also the spiritual and the personal side of Jen. She is a really great friend. She will send me notes randomly that just brighten my day. She always knows what to say when she sends me these cute little text messages just to say hi. She is so in tune with the spirit. And to give you a little bit of background, I remember thinking to myself one day, this was in the middle of, I think you had just announced that you had cancer. And I remember thinking, how is she so positive and so happy right now? This is not humanly possible. Either she's faking or she knows something that I don't know. And as I've gotten to know her, I've come to learn that Jen has been through a lot in her life. And all of these trials and these challenges have refined, but also taught Jen how to rely on her Savior and how he is her best friend. So without further ado, I want Jen to explain to us, how were you so positive during your cancer and how did you get there and what tips do you have for us to remain positive and joyful through our trials?
Yes. First of all, Bonnie, thank you so much for having me on. This is a delight. It's so wonderful to see you doing this. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Because I remember when we were talking about this a long time ago that you felt prompted to do this. And it was like, whoa, okay. Am I going to actually bring this thing to life? So well done, sister. You're doing it and you're making a difference.
It was all because of you. She is who got me to finally get off my procrastination horse and start doing this. So yes. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. Lovingly nudged you off. It might have included a couple of elbows and a foot, but yes. So, goodness, joy through my cancer. You know what? So I remember driving down the road and I was on my way to go see my butt doctor. I like to call him a butt doctor because saying like colorectal doctor sounds boring. So let's just call him a butt doctor, right? You know? And so I'm on my way to go see him. And my kid was at daycare. My husband's at work, whatever. I'm alone in the car. And I was going to see him because the so fun topic to refer to hemorrhoids. Yay. So great to talk about butt stuff. Anyhow, so I'm on my way to go see them because they were hurting and I was uncomfortable, and they were uncomfortable enough. I had flown back from speaking at a conference and I couldn't sit still in the seat on the plane. And I kept having like use the sidearms to push my butt off of the seat because I couldn't sit because the hemorrhoids were hurting so bad. And I'm like, okay, this is it. I gotta do the things, you know, and it's super embarrassing, you know, to have people like in there doing your thing. It's just like, but I'm like, okay, this hurts enough. I got to go see him. So I'm in the car driving to go see the doctor. And you know how like sometimes you're alone in the car and you just know that God's sitting in the front seat with you having a chat, you know? So it was one of those numbers. And just the Spirit just said, you need to tell the doctor about like some other like symptoms that I've been having. I was like, no, I don't, you know, and I'm thinking all the people driving around me are like thinking I'm just crazy talking to myself, right? I'm like, no, I don't need to do this. And I'm like waving my hands, you know, I don't even have any Italian heritage, but I talk with my hands. And so I'm like, no, we're not going there. We're not doing the things. And I get to the doctor's appointment and I'm sitting there waiting, and he comes in to the room and it was just like this conversation bubble like exploded out of my mouth before I could do anything, right? It was like, hey, so I got something I need to tell you. And I'm like, okay, guess we're doing it. Right? Yeah. Where's that rewind button? You know? And so and he's like, yeah, so what's going on? And so I had been experiencing some blood in my stool. And I brought it up, I said, I want to let you know, because he knew I was there for hemorrhoids, because they know what the appointment's about, right? Mm-hmm. But when I told him, he's like, blood in your stool? He's like, okay, let's talk about this. So at the time, in shape, I'm doing spin classes, eating mostly vegan, 45 years old, you know, healthy, you know, relatively fit, could always lose a little bit here and there, you know, but fit. And he looks at me, he's like, Jen, he's like, you should not have blood in your stool. He's like, is there any history of colon cancer? And I'm like, what? You know, I never even thought about this, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, we have strokes and heart attacks in our family. We don't do the cancer bus, you know? And so he's like, well, this is odd. Let's do a colonoscopy. And so I mean, I'd heard of people doing colonoscopies, but I didn't have any like, oh, hey, no, I'm not doing that. You know, like it wasn't anything. I've talked to other people since then. They were like, no way, I'm not having somebody stick a tube up my butt. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's really not hard. It's like the best nap of your life and you wake up and it's done. Anyhow.
You're mostly knocked out, right?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it's whatever the stuff they used to give to Michael Jackson to make him like go to sleep. I don't remember. I need to ask my husband. He's a nurse. He knows this stuff. But
okay, like now I want to know why Michael Jackson was getting.
Because he was total, like that's a whole other story about like how jacked up he was.
Okay.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for the good songs. And so, so So this was in August, and he said, it could take up to 3 months. This is not like an urgent priority because I guess the colonoscopy clinics are like way like booked out for like months. And then I got a call like a week later and they said, so we've got an appointment for you. And I said, oh, okay. So, and I don't know about you, but as a busy working mom, I'm always like, okay, what are my options? Right. Like,
Right. Is this going to fit into my day?
exactly. The things. And so they're like, oh yeah, it's on such and such day. And I said, okay, but what's the next one? And the next one was like 2 months later. So, oh, let's go ahead and go with the first one. That sounds good. Right. And then when I went for the colonoscopy, I wasn't scared. I wasn't thinking anything at all. Like it was more, well, thank goodness I have healthcare and I have the ability to do this. And I live in a day and age where we can actually, look inside kind of deal. And so I come out of the colonoscopy and the doctor said that he could only go a certain portion into my colon before he encountered a large enough mass where he's like, I'm pretty sure it's cancer. He's like, now obviously we have to go through all these tests and stuff. He's like, but I've been doing this for years. He's like, I know cancer. I know it. And so your colon is about 4 feet long and they were only able to go 22 centimeters in. So about a little less than a foot in. And so my next thought was, okay, well, that's all you saw was the first 22 centimeters. What about the other 3 feet, of stuff? He's like, sorry. He's like, I'm not pushing the tube past it. I'm worried about puncturing it, like all the things. And so, so that led to, my husband was there. We were crying, all the things. And, so my husband left the room. I was there with the nurse alone for a couple of minutes. And this guy, his name was John. He's a nurse. And he said, listen, he said, I have come from being a nurse for the cancer patients that are inpatient, meaning they're so sick they can't ever go home. They have to be in the hospital 24/7. They're totally on pain meds and all the chemo stuff and all the thing. Like it's like you think of those emaciated people you see like in the pictures of like what the Nazis did to the Jews, in terms of like, think like that, right? And so that's the type of patients he was dealing with. And he said, the ones who fared the best did 2 things. They kept their faith and they kept their humor. Okay. I'm like, I can do that. I got both of those in spades. I can do this. And so in that moment, I made the decision, I'm going to approach whatever this is, come what may and love it. Thank you, Wortham. Love that quote. I'm going to approach it with faith and with humor, and decided that was going to be how I wanted to handle my cancer journey. To what end, I had no idea. There are a lot of people who die from colon cancer. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who survive colon cancer too. Like I didn't know, I had no idea. And so, so that was kind of the beginning of it. And I then just sought to, okay, there's got to be some good in this. Where's the good in this? Because I've been, long before cancer showed up, I've had my fair share of trauma and all the other things. And there's been good in those traumatic moments too. So I thought, okay, here we go. And then I definitely used it as an opportunity to testify of God's love a lot. So
I like that you predetermined your attitude. You decided right then and there mm-hmm. how you wanted to react and how you wanted to live through this.
Yeah.
And I think there's a life lesson there. We encounter trials every single day, mm-hmm. and making that decision ahead of time that we're going to approach it with faith and humor. I think humor is smart too, because if we make light of the situation, that helps lighten all the way around, right? Like lightens your spirit and doesn't necessarily make it less serious, right? It's still a serious thing, but it allows you to see, what does laughter do, right? It releases serotonin and it literally changes the chemicals in your brain to help you be happy, right? And humor does that. And so you're constantly releasing those happy hormones, which when you're happy, you're healthier and your body's able to combat disease easier. So it's like the cycle. So
Yes.
there's both mental and emotional repercussions of making that decision, but also spiritual. The fact that you chose that you weren't going to let this trial take you away from Heavenly Father
Yes.
in that relationship. Let's pivot for a second, because you brought up the fact that you've been through a lot of trauma and you had seen how going through that trauma and going through those experiences, there was good that came from that. And because you were able to reflect on that, you're able to then say, okay, something good can come from this, whether it's this means that I'm on my way now out. At least if I'm on my way out, at least I can go out singing God's praises, right?
Right. Exactly.
So what, you don't have to go into all the detail, whatever you feel you want to share. Which of those experiences and what are the things that came to your mind when you said that really prepared you for this?
Sure, absolutely. Well, so when I reflect back when I was a child and being around alcoholic, drug addict parents and all the stuff that comes with that, I wasn't as a little kid saying, hey, I'm going to skip through this thing, la, 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 I wasn't like saying, oh, let me just be Pollyanna. Well, it'll be fine, And so but there came a point in my life looking back on things like that, where it's like, oh, okay, so I can choose to learn from it. I can choose to see where were the angels, right? Like that nurse, his name was John. He was totally an earthly angel. I've never seen him since. I don't even know what his last name is, so I can't even find him, right? I can't be like, dear John, nurse at such and such. I'm like, I don't even know what it is, but in those right moments, those right people that show up all the time, and I choose to see them. I choose to acknowledge that they're on my path. And so if I know I'm going through something, I know, because it goes back to when I was that little kid, that God will always put the right people on my path at the right time. And if for some reason, if I'm not seeing it, it's because I'm not paying attention. Like I know that they are there. And so, so even as a kid, I had wonderful people in my life who buoyed me up and surrounded me with love and made it safe for me to be there. So I had best friends, and their parents knew. I don't know how much they knew what was going on in my household, but I'm sure they knew some stuff. And so they made it safe for me to be at their house. Not that I moved in with them, but spent a lot of time, a lot of overnights, a lot of family dinners, a lot of let me stay after school as long as I possibly can before I have to go back to my household. Right. And so that way I could avoid whatever I could possibly be encountering after school by being somewhere else. Right. And so, so in choosing, okay, well, what's my attitude with this new trauma, this new thing that's going on with cancer? It's reflecting back on, okay, but there is good. There's always some good stuff to recognize. And then when I also think about my parents' divorce, and in the 80s, people weren't really getting divorced.
Right.
It was starting to happen a little bit, but not that much. It wasn't really till the 90s that it started to really become kind of more the norm. So I was kind of like, oh, I don't want to be that kid.
Right.
And then in 1989, when I was a freshman in high school, is when my dad committed suicide. And my mom had such a just rocky, just so much going on, and yet such a deep love for each other, right? They couldn't love each other and then also allow for all this drugs and alcohol and everything. It was just not a good combination. And so I remember at that point thinking, I don't want to be this kid whose dad committed suicide. I mean, at that point, I didn't know anybody who committed suicide. I didn't know anybody at all. This was not something people were talking about at all.
Well, and I don't think it was nearly as common. You're only a few years older than me. I think you're 5 years older than me or something. And we, I remember when my parents got divorced in high school, thinking kind of the same thing, like, whose parents get divorced? I knew, I think one, maybe two other kids. I happened to be dating a boy whose parents were divorced. And that was a real blessing because his mom really helped me through a lot of that. Like
Yeah.
you said, right? There's always those angels that Heavenly Father puts in your path. That kid turned out to be a total weasel, but his mom was my saving grace during that time.
Awesome. That's beautiful. What a
And
gift.
suicide, like you said, it wasn't common.
Mm-mm.
I knew two kids who committed suicide in junior high and high school. It's just not common. Did you feel, because you didn't know anybody, did you feel alone? Like, what helped you cope with that at that time?
Yeah. I had to set it aside and not carry it. I had to like just be like, and forgive the giggles, but I really had to just be like, okay, that sucks. Thanks a lot, Dad. I remember totally having like that kind of thought, like, thanks a lot. Thanks for like not wanting to be here. Appreciate and then me, super selfish freshman in high school, being like, crap, now I always have to live with my mom. And my mom and I, we've repaired our relationship since then, but I was like, so I felt like, okay, things are not great. Remember before this, I was already like not wanting to be home a lot. My parents were already divorced. And so I was like, I talked about how I extended my after school time at my friend's house so I could go home as late as I possibly could. And hoping my mom was still out and I could just go to bed, and then she might come home or might not. And then I could just, wake up in the morning and go to school, and I may or may not talk to her. Right. So there was a little bit of, I have to set this aside and let that be my dad's decision, and then take care of my heart. And thankfully at the time I have really good friends. I didn't have a huge network of friends, which I don't think that helps you with being lonely or not lonely. I think it's healthy to have a small handful of close friends, right? Versus hundreds of, casual friends. But I had some really close girlfriends who just loved on me. And my mom was going through her own stuff. And then I have a brother who's 2 years younger than me. And so he was going through his version of stuff. So I think it fractured us. Like, we definitely went our different ways, and we got the help that we needed from different people. At the time, I had just joined a Lutheran church just a few months before. And I grew up in a family that there wasn't any religion or anything in the family. We were aware of God, but it wasn't like we weren't going to church. There was no reading scriptures, praying, like nothing like that. Mm-hmm. So when my best friend at the time, when she had invited me to go to the youth group for her Lutheran church, I went because, again, wanted to stay with her as long as I could, during the day. And I loved how it felt being in that sacred space. Mm-hmm. And the youth leaders were fantastic and loving, and they knew some stuff about me, right? And yet at the same time, there were definitely pieces of the doctrine that didn't make sense. So I remember talking with the reverend, and he's like, well, your dad's committed suicide. And I'm like, so what does that mean? And he's like, I don't know what that means. He's like, I don't really know where your dad is right now. And I'm like, I couldn't wrap my mind around it, right? And so doctrinally, there were things that they couldn't answer, However, I still felt the love of God at the time, and the love of God that would show up by way of people collecting me in their arms and giving me hugs, checking on me, inviting me. Like, I felt that. I definitely felt it. So when I'm saying I had to set that stuff aside and just let my dad live in his decision, and then it became, okay, what am I going to do to take care of me? And I think about how it was quite adult thinking for a 14-year-old. Uh-huh. Very, very adult thinking. And I'm grateful that whoever I was and whatever else I had experienced with the drama, the trauma, the whatever else was going on, prepared me to be a little bit more aware when that happened of what I needed. And my brother, again, he had his friends, and my mom was doing her thing, and, all the pieces and parts. And I continued to hang out in that Lutheran community, and was still very, very involved in it, and going to church on Sunday. And I look back, I'm like, isn't that funny? where a lot of kids, teenagers, they're like, meh, I don't need church. I was like, I know I want it. Like, let me tell you the opposite, what's going on in my household. Like, no. Like, there's a lot of good stuff, right? Even though at the time I couldn't wrap my mind around, what do you mean we don't know where my dad's spirit is.
I just appreciate that he didn't come out and say he's in hell or something like that, right? I've heard people whose pastors or priests have said things like that, and it just breaks my heart. I think, how do you know that? Like, I feel like God is more merciful.
Right. And I think that's where I was coming from too, is like, well, clearly, like, your dad's hurting. Like, I don't know where he's at. So, but it was,
that's great. I think very aware for that. Are they Lutheran? Are they priests? What's the title for the?
Yeah, so they are allowed to get married and stuff in the Lutheran, like the pastors or pastors.
Oh, he's a pastor. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's very in tune of that pastor and wise of him to say that he doesn't know, but that he feels like God's merciful. I think that's really great that he said that to you.
Yeah. And in a partial answer, right? Because it's still left me. And
and what's next? So if you don't know where he is, okay. Yeah, I can see how that would be a little bit troubling, but then for you to be able to recognize this is not my burden to carry. His decision to do this is not my burden. I need to focus on me and growing yourself and moving on with school and all those things, and not let this tragedy weigh you down. I think, like you said, that's very mature for a 14-year-old. Mm-hmm. Wow. And very heavy. And you could just say, here, God, take this burden, take this heaviness from me and help me move on. So we'll fast forward a little bit, because I know that maybe I don't want to fast forward. You're telling your story, but I do know that at what point did you take that off the shelf, or did you take that off the shelf? Did you even need to take it off the shelf?
Oh, about my dad's choice to take his life?
Yeah.
Well, what I took off of the shelf more was, this is part of my story too. Even though it was my dad's decision, it is part of my story, because all of these family decisions, it's a tapestry, right? We're all woven together, our little strings and things. And so I ended up so I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I ended up going to a private Catholic university for my college years. And when I was there, it was a very small campus. Like, I think it's less than 300, probably around like 260 students live on campus in the dorms.
That's small.
It's very small, smaller than my high school, right? I mean,
it's very tiny.
Small. So I often say,
you have like one-on-one private instruction.
Oh yeah,
totally. with your professor.
Yeah, really, pretty much. Yes, my average class size was 14. My largest class was 36. I had my Spanish class was with a teacher who knew Fidel Castro on a first name basis. Like, I'm like, yeah. So very, 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 very small. I often joke and say it was like summer camp for 4 years, right? Because we just had a good time. And so when I was there, one of my classmates, her father committed suicide. And I remember being in the dorms, and she was just a year younger than me. And I remember thinking, well, crap, this sucks, because it definitely brought up a whole heap of emotions. So at this point, I'm trying to like calculate how many years. This is like 7 years after my dad had committed suicide. So not very long, right? But during that time, again, you might hear somebody, like, something happens, but nothing that was super close to me as far as somebody losing a family member to suicide. So I do remember talking to her, and I do remember our classmates asking me, they're like, Jen, what do we do to help her? And I was able to give them, hey, this is some stuff that she's going to need, some help that she's going to need. And I talked
that.
And what was the advice? Is that what you said?
What was the help that she would need?
Yeah, exactly. So most of it was, don't ignore it. It's a real thing. And to be around her enough so that when she's ready to talk, you are ready and available. And then the third thing that was really important to me was, you don't know what's going on, and you don't have to know what's going on to love and support her. Because like none of the rest of our friend circle had experienced suicide yet. I mean, we knew what it was, but none of them had experienced it personally. And I didn't want them to unplug from the relationship and say, sorry, I haven't experienced that, so I have nothing to add. I'm just, and have that kind of weirdness, you know, that sometimes people can allow to come. It's like, no, it's okay. What's more important is just love her, right? And leverage the fact that you guys have been friends. You've been living in the same, you know, college community for years together. Like, you know, there's connection there, you know, so don't throw that out just because her dad committed suicide. So I know all those things were really helpful to our friends. And I even talked to the director of housing about it, because she's like, okay, what do you think? You know, what do we think we need to do? And, you know, to support that gal and to, you know, to rally around her and whatnot. So what I did is, when you said taking it off the shelf, what I did is I took off the shelf, what's my part in understanding this, and how can I leverage that to make a difference for other people? And so it wasn't like all of a sudden I'm going, hey, everybody, look at me, and holding up a sign, my dad committed suicide too. It's like, this isn't what this is about. This is about, we've got a gal in our school community, very small school community, who is very vulnerable and sensitive right now. And so I just try to take everything I could to just shine that goodness toward her, and to make sure, you know, to kind of redirect people back toward, how do we love on her? How do we let her just be a heap of tears and let it be okay? And we don't have to fix it. We're not in a position to fix it.
We don't have to fix it. Oh, and that is a hard one for me to accept. We don't have to fix.
Yeah. And that's where, like, I couldn't fix my dad, right? Like, none of it. And I've seen years of drug and alcohol abuse, and it was hard. It was really hard to watch that, you know. And as a kid, I was like, this is tough. But I didn't stop trying to play with my dad either. Like, it's something my dad and we love together is art, or we love going to the beach, because near San Francisco, there's some really cool beaches and stuff. Think more of like the big, like rocky cliff style beach, you know, like that kind of stuff. And so we have some really lovely memories. And so I remember that. I remember my dad, like, we'd stop at the convenience store. My dad would buy a 6-pack of beer, and I get like a 3 Musketeers. You know, it was like, okay, here we go. But I also remember being very aware of the fact of, like, is my dad drunk? Like, should he be driving? You know? And as a kid, again, a very mature, you know, perspective, right? And so just being like, I just am so grateful that God's given me that. It's like a gift of discernment and paying attention to what's going on, you know, around me, and to be sensitive to that. So then when you fast forward to this gal whose father committed suicide, just that gift of discernment and paying attention to the culture around this person's going through a traumatic situation. How do we love that person regardless of the choices of somebody else, or, you know, or whatever it is. So I was grateful for that I could leverage it. And that was a big eye opener for me, because I never came out of my dad's suicide thinking, when I have a friend whose family member commits suicide, I'm going to do X. There was never that intentionality. But when it showed up, it gave me, again, an opportunity to stop, look at the thing, and say, okay, what am I going to do with this? So again, fast forward to colon cancer. Here it is. Okay, what am I going to do with this? Well, what has served me well is faith, humor, you know, keep myself focused in on what can I control, you know, things like that. And so that's where I think that little by little we build ourselves, and we build our spiritual resilience when we come through these traumatic things, is what has served you well. And it doesn't mean you're all of a sudden, I'm not going to have another problem in the future. I have no idea what could possibly come.